I took her in. I raised her daughter. I buried my wife alone because she couldn't be bothered to fly back from wherever she'd disappeared to. And then, 8 years later, she showed up at my door with a man I'd never seen before, a manila folder under his arm, and a look on her face like she was doing me a favor. That's where the story ends. But it starts somewhere quieter. It starts with a Tuesday morning in September, a car in my driveway, and a car seat I didn't own. My daughter had always been the complicated one. Not troubled, not exactly. Complicated. She saw the world as something that owed her, and when it didn't pay up on schedule, she made someone else foot the bill. Usually me. Sometimes her mother. Toward the end, mostly her mother. When she was 26, she got pregnant. The father, a man she'd been seeing for less than 4 months, left before the baby came. She moved back into the house in Barrie, into her old bedroom with the faded purple walls, and I repainted it. Put up new curtains, built a crib from a flat pack box that took me 3 hours and cost me my reading glasses somewhere in the instructions. My granddaughter was born in March. Small, loud, perfect. My wife fell in love with her immediately. The way grandmothers do. Completely, no conditions, no questions. My daughter stayed 8 months. I should have seen it coming. She'd always had one foot out the door even as a child. But when you're standing in your own kitchen watching your daughter pack a bag at 6 in the morning and your granddaughter is asleep in the next room, and the only explanation you get is, "I need to figure some things out, Dad. I'll be back in a few weeks." You don't see it. You don't let yourself. She left a note on the counter. Short. Said she loved the baby. Said she needed space. Said she'd call. The car seat was still in my hallway. I called her 3 times that first day. Twice the second. By the end of the week, the calls started going straight to voicemail. By the end of the month, the number was disconnected. My wife, Eleanor. That's what everyone called her. Though her full name was Eleanor Grace and she signed everything that way. She was the one who held it together those first weeks. She handled the doctors, the daycare registration, the paperwork at Service Ontario to get my granddaughter properly documented in our care. She was the kind of woman who dealt with hard things by doing things, and I loved her for it. We named the situation what it was, not babysitting, not temporary. We contacted a family lawyer, a soft-spoken woman in an office above a Tim Hortons on Dunlop Street, and she helped us file for informal custody. The kind that gives grandparents legal footing to make medical decisions, register a child in school, deal with government offices. We documented everything, every expense, every doctor's visit, every permission form. My granddaughter started calling me grandpa before she could say much else. She called Eleanor Nan, and that was that. Life settled, slowly then completely. I was 61 when this started. Retired from 28 years at the municipality. Pension coming in steady. Mortgage paid off. Garden in the back that kept me sane. We weren't rich people, but we were comfortable. And more than that, we were present. Present in a way my daughter had never quite managed to be, even before she left. My granddaughter grew up in that house on Sunnydale Road. She learned to ride a bike in the driveway. She burned her first batch of cookies in my kitchen and cried about it and then laughed about it. She had a best friend named Aliyah who lived 2 streets over, and on summer evenings they'd sit on the front porch eating popsicles until dark. My neighbor, a retired postal worker named Cecil, big man, quiet unless he had something worth saying, became a fixture in her life too. He taught me chess in my 40s, and when my granddaughter was 7, she decided she wanted to learn. So every Sunday afternoon, Cecil would come over and the 3 of us would sit at the kitchen table with the old wooden board between us. Cecil had no grandchildren of his own. He never said so, but I think those Sunday games meant something to him. Eleanor got sick when my granddaughter was 9. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in October, gone by the following June. 8 months from diagnosis to burial. I don't talk about that period much. What I'll say is this. My granddaughter was the reason I got out of bed every morning during those months. She was 10 years old and she'd lost her nan and she needed someone to stay standing. So I stayed standing. After Eleanor, the house was different. Quieter in a way that pressed against you. But my granddaughter filled it. She played music too loud and left her school things on the kitchen table and asked me questions I didn't always know how to answer. And I am grateful for every single bit of it. I did not hear from my daughter for 8 years. She came back on a Wednesday. October, overcast, that particular grey that southern Ontario does in autumn like it's rehearsing for something worse. I was in the driveway raking leaves when a rental car pulled up, one of those anonymous silver sedans, and she got out. I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she changed drastically, but because my brain refused the information for a moment. 8 years is a long time. She was 34 now, thin in a way that didn't look healthy, hair shorter than I remembered. The man who got out of the passenger side was wearing a suit. Mid-40s, briefcase. He looked like someone who'd been paid to be there. My daughter didn't hug me. She said, "Hi, Dad," the way you'd say it to an acquaintance you'd run into at a grocery store. I said, "Where have you been?" It wasn't a question. She knew that. She said she'd been in Vancouver, then Calgary. That things had been hard. That she'd gotten her life together. She said she was ready to be a mother now. She said she wanted to take her daughter home. I told her come inside. I told the man in the suit he could wait in the car. He did not wait in the car. He came inside too and sat at my kitchen table uninvited and set his briefcase on the surface where Cecil and my granddaughter played chess on Sundays, and I had to work very hard not to say something I'd regret. His name was Whitmore. He handed me a business card, family law, downtown Toronto. He said, in the measured tone of a man accustomed to delivering bad news to strangers, that my daughter was prepared to pursue full custody of her child through the courts and that given the informal nature of our arrangement, she was confident the court would find in her favor. I said, "She's 16 years old. She hasn't seen you in 8 years. You're going to drag her into a courtroom." My daughter looked at the table. I said, "Does she know you're here?" Nobody answered. My granddaughter was at school. She came home at 4 o'clock, dropped her bag by the door, called out, "Grandpa," and walked into the kitchen to find her mother sitting at the table. I will not describe what happened in that room in detail because it is not mine to describe. What I will say is that it was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. My granddaughter stood very still for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Why are you here?" And her mother started talking about fresh starts and second chances and how she'd changed, and I watched my granddaughter's face go through about 15 different expressions in the space of a minute. Later, after my daughter and Whitmore had gone to a hotel, I did not offer them the guest room. My granddaughter sat at the kitchen table and said, "She wants to take me away, doesn't she?" I said, "She wants to try." She said, "I'm not going." I said, "I know." The next 2 weeks were a particular kind of misery. Whitmore filed a custody application with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. Because my daughter was the biological parent and I had only informal documentation, no formal custody order, just our family lawyer's paperwork from years ago. His position had more footing than I'd expected. I called her family lawyer. She was less reassuring than I needed her to be. She said we had a solid case, 8 years of records, school documents, medical files, proof of stable home, but that the courts generally weighted biological parental parent rights heavily, and that my daughter's lawyer appeared to know what he was doing. What I hadn't expected was the second filing. Whitmore's second document arrived by registered mail. I read it twice before I understood what I was reading. It alleged that I had, 8 years prior, prevented my daughter from maintaining contact with her child, that I had withheld my granddaughter from her mother, that I had, in effect, removed the child from her mother's custody without consent. The word they used was interference, just short of the word I'd been afraid of. I called Cecil. He came over that evening with a bottle of sortilege and 2 glasses, and he sat across from me and let me talk for 2 hours straight. That's the kind of friend Cecil was. He didn't try to fix it while I was still in the middle of it. He just sat there, and when I finally ran out of words, he said, "You kept the note." I looked at him. He said, "The note she left on the counter the morning she walked out. Did you keep it?" I had kept it. Not deliberately, not as strategy. I'd put it in the kitchen drawer and then put other things on top of it. And eventually it had migrated to a file folder in the cabinet in my office. Because I keep things like that. Because Eleanor always told me I kept too much paper and maybe she was right, but I found it that night. A single sheet of lined paper, my daughter's handwriting, the date at the top. I need to figure some things out. I'll be back in a few weeks. And her signature. I also had the voicemails. 3 years of voicemails I'd left her that went unanswered. The call logs on 2 phones. A series of letters I'd sent to the last address I had for her in Vancouver. Sent registered mail, all returned unopened. I had the receipts, every OHIP billing, every school registration, every prescription. every pair of winter boots. And I had one more thing. The summer my granddaughter was 7, 2 years after my daughter left, I'd received a single email from an address I didn't recognize. It was short. It said she was in Vancouver, that she was using, that she was trying to get clean, that she couldn't be a mother right now and she knew it, and that she was grateful the baby was with me. She didn't use the word permission, but that's what it was. Documented, dated, sent to my email address, and sitting in my inbox for 9 years. I called our lawyer at 7 the next morning. She said, "Forward me that email right now." I won't pretend the months between that phone call and the hearing were easy. They weren't. My granddaughter was 16 and she had enough awareness of what was happening that she couldn't fully be shielded from it. And I didn't think it was right to try. I told her the truth in language that didn't catastrophize. There was a legal process. We had good documentation. We had a good lawyer. And I was not going to stop fighting. She asked me one evening in November if she could write something for the court. A statement. Her own words. Our lawyer said yes. A judge could consider a statement from a child of 16. And in fact, it would carry weight. My granddaughter spent 3 evenings at the kitchen table writing that statement. She wouldn't let me read it until she was done. When she handed it to me, I got through the first 2 paragraphs before I had to stop and look at the ceiling for a while. She wrote about making cookies with Eleanor. She wrote about Cecil teaching her chess. She wrote about the night her nan died and how I'd sat with her until 4 in the morning talking about everything and nothing, because neither of us could sleep. She wrote that she had a home, and that a home was not just a building, and that she would like the court to understand the difference. Cecil also submitted a statement, unsolicited, but our lawyer welcomed it. A retired civil servant with no stake in the outcome. 30 years as a documented neighbor. Sunday chess games and a straightforward account of what he'd observed over 8 years. The judge would not be able to dismiss it easily. The hearing was in February. Toronto, a courtroom on University Avenue. Grey light coming through tall windows. I wore my good coat. My granddaughter sat in the hallway with our lawyer's assistant because she was not required to be present, but she'd insisted on coming, and I hadn't had the heart to argue. Whitmore presented his case with professional polish. My daughter sat beside him in a grey blazer, hands folded, looking composed. I watched her and tried to find something familiar in her face, and I did around the eyes, the way she tilted her head, and it hurt more than I expected. Our lawyer presented ours. The email came up. Whitmore tried to argue it had been sent under duress, that it couldn't be verified as voluntary. Our lawyer had anticipated this. She submitted the metadata from the email header, the IP address traced to Vancouver's downtown east side, the timestamp. She submitted the return letters. She submitted the call logs. She submitted a declaration from the school board confirming 8 consecutive years of enrolled attendance. Emergency contact listed as me and me alone. No contact from the biological parent in any school record. She submitted my granddaughter's statement. The judge, a woman in her 50s, reading glasses on a chain. The kind of face that didn't give much away. Read the statement in silence. It took her longer than I expected. She set it down and looked over her glasses at the room. She asked my daughter one question. She said, "When was the last time you had direct contact with your daughter before October of this year?" My daughter looked at Whitmore. He said something quietly. She said, "I sent messages." The judge said, "Through what channel?" My daughter didn't answer. The judge looked back at her papers. She wrote the following afternoon. Full formal custody granted to me, with a supervised visitation pathway available to my daughter contingent on demonstrated stability. Consistent address. Documented sobriety. 6-month minimum. The interference allegations were dismissed. Court costs awarded against the petitioner. I sat in that courtroom and I didn't cry, but it was close. My daughter left the courthouse without speaking to me. I saw her on the steps as I came out. She was standing apart from Whitmore, arms crossed, looking at the street. She looked like she had when she was 19, and things hadn't gone the way she wanted. And she didn't know yet that she was the reason why. I almost went to her. I'm not sure what I would have said, but she got into a cab before I had the chance, and the cab pulled away, and that was that. My granddaughter was waiting by the car. She looked at my face and read it correctly, the way she'd been reading my face since she was small. She said, "We won?" I said, "We won." She hugged me. She's taller than me now, has been since she was 15, so she had to sort of fold herself down a bit, and I held on for longer than was probably dignified, and I didn't apologize for it. Cecile was waiting at the house when we got home. He'd made chili. He'd also, characteristically, set up the chessboard on the kitchen table. We ate, the three of us, and then we played chess until almost 11 o'clock, and my granddaughter beat Cecile for the first time. Legitimately, no quarter given, and he accused her of hustling him for 8 years, and she laughed so hard she knocked a pawn off the table. I watched them argue about it across the board. This retired postman and this girl I'd raised, bickering over a game in my kitchen. And I thought about Eleanor, the way I always do when something good happens. Because she should have been there to see it. She would have loved this. She would have been insufferable about the chili. Said it needed more paprika. Eaten 3 bows anyway. My granddaughter is in the second year with master now. Kinesiology. She calls me on Sunday evenings. Usually while she's walking somewhere, I can tell by the wind in the call. And we talk about whatever's happening. The week's small irritations and small victories. The way people do when they're comfortable with each other. She came home at Christmas and we played chess with Cecil, and she beat him again, and he told her she had no respect for her elders, and she told him she'd learn from the best. My daughter has not reached out. I don't know where she is. I hope she's somewhere safe. I hope, one day, when she's ready, she'll reach out to her daughter. Not to me, to her daughter. And that my granddaughter will have enough of her own life built up around her, that she can meet that conversation from solid ground. I can't fix what happened. I can't give my granddaughter back the mother she didn't have, or give Eleanor back the years the cancer took, or give any of us back the ordinary Tuesday morning when a car pulled out of the driveway and didn't come back. What I can do is what I've done. Show up, document everything, keep the note, keep the voicemails, keep the old email sitting in inbox on a laptop that's 2 models out of date but that I've never replaced, because you never know. And keep the chessboard out on the kitchen table, just in case. There's something I've been sitting with since that February afternoon on University Avenue, and it's this. Nothing that happened in that courtroom came out of nowhere. Every piece of it. The email, the letters, the school records, the voicemails existed because at some point, years earlier, I made a quiet decision to do the right thing even when no one was watching. Not because I expected it to pay off. I didn't. I kept records because Eleanor raised me to believe that if something matters, you treat it like it matters. You write it down. You follow through. That's not strategy. That's just how decent people move through the world. My daughter made her own choices. She chose to leave. She chose to disappear. She chose years later to come back not with a conversation but with a lawyer, and to file documents alleging things she knew weren't true. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I said it with bitterness for a long time, but that passes eventually if you let it. What I'll say now is that the consequences she faced in that courtroom were the direct result of her own paper trail. She wrote that email. She signed that letter. The judge didn't need my word against hers. She had handed me the truth years before she decided to contest it. That's the part I want people to understand, especially if they're in the middle of something hard right now. The choices you make when things are difficult, when you're tired, when no one's giving you credit, when the right thing is also the harder thing, those choices accumulate. They become the record. And one day the record is all you have left to stand on. Cecil is the other part of this I think about. He had no obligation to write that statement. He had no stake in the outcome. He did it because he's a man of integrity. Because he'd watched an honest situation unfold over 8 years and he wasn't willing to let it be misrepresented. That kind of clarity, knowing what you've seen, being willing to say it plainly, is its own form of courage. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up when it's needed. And my granddaughter. She sat down at that kitchen table and wrote the truth about her own life in plain language because she understood, at 16, that her story belonged to her and she had the right to tell it. That took something, a kind of clear-eyed determination that I think she built slowly, over years of being taken seriously in this house, of being listened to, of watching adults around her handle hard things without falling apart. I spent 34 years in construction management, and the one thing this industry tortured. And there's still mornings, too short-tempered some mornings, too slow sometimes to understand what she actually needed. But I showed up. Every morning I showed up, and I think that's what it comes down to. In the end, Not the grand gestures, not the courtroom victory, but the 1,000 ordinary mornings where you get up and do the thing anyway. She's at McMaster now. She calls on Sundays. The chessboard is still on the kitchen table. That's enough. That's more than enough.